Alright, in this tutorial we're going to map a texture on a shape that was very similar to that rocket that we created inside the tutorial. So I'm going to select my geometry and you can see pretty readily that it's a polygon that's been revolved. Alright, so we'll take the same approach we had in our tutorial. So once again, the first thing I want to do is I want to assign a texture to this. So I'll right click, I'll choose assign new material. I think I'll use a blend this time, so it's got a bit of a sheen. Once I've done that, I'll right click and choose material attributes. And then I'll go to my color tab. I'll go to the checkerboard at the end of it. From the create render node, I'll click on the default checker pattern, and then I'll select my geometry inside my viewport, and I'll hold down the space bar, create UVs, cylindrical mapping. Now this is much the same way the sphere was mapped when we used the spherical mapping UV. You'll notice there are these two red tabs, and once again I will hide the texture for a moment so that you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just going to take these red tabs and draw them to each other, and all that does is assures me that that pattern I put on goes on my geometry just the one time. Okay, and this is all very subjective. Alright, so now when I've got what I want, I'll hit 6 on the keyboard and I'll right click and I'll go back to my object mode. And now I'm ready to go to my UV texture editor. So I'll select my geometry, I'll click on my UV texture editor, and there's my shape, my UV map inside my texture editor. And once again, I would like this to be as square as possible. It's a little bit more of a flat rectangle, a little wider than high. So I'll go and I'll edit this from the UV texture. So I'm going to right click inside the texture editor and I'm going to choose shell. And now all you need to do is click on that shell anywhere, and I'll hit W first to move it. And then I'll hit R to get my scale tool. So I'll start to scale this in a bit like so. And then I'm going to make sure that my rectangles are squares as close as I can get to them. And I'm looking at the middle of the geometry. I'm not worried about the tips or the bottom running edge here. I'm more or less concerned about what's in the middle here. Okay, so once you've got something that looks acceptable, right click, return back to your object mode, hit Command S to save. And we'll go ahead now and we'll save this so we can open it in Photoshop. So once again, inside the UV texture editor, I'm going to go to Image, Create PSD Network. The settings are there by default from the previous tutorial, so I don't really have to do anything other than make sure it's directed to my source images, which it is. And I'll just call this Rocket Skin. And I'll hit Save. I'll move the Color tab over to the selected attributes, and before I commit to this I want to make sure all of it is inside here, so this little bit of indiscrepancy is here. So what I'm going to do is I'll go to my shell once again, I'll select it, I'll hit W, and I'll just drag it over like so. You can see it's that tip. Okay, now these are things we can deal with as we get more into more complex editing of texture apps inside of mine, but for this purpose this will be all right. I'm not worried about it. Okay, so now I've got what I want. I'll go back to my object mode, select it, and I better put that back in, and I'll hit create. All right, so now I can open that inside of Photoshop, and I can introduce my texture. All right, so we're back in Photoshop. We're about to texture the rocket shape. So once again, I'll go down to the checkerboard layer inside the folder that's been generated by Maya. Once again, I will put black in. And now I'll use that same texture map and paste it into that file. And I'll scale it down accordingly. Maybe like so. and I'll save it. Now I'm going to go back into Maya, and I'll go to my material attributes, and I will reload the texture. Now, you can see there's a translucence to this, and that happens quite often, so all I need to do now is go back up to where my blend resides here, and I'm going to click on the box with the triangle pointing to the right, and then I'm going to right click on the word transparency and choose break connection, and now my texture is placed on my geometry as I had mapped it. Okay. Now the nice thing about the texture editor inside of Maya is that you always have the opportunity to go in and tweak it here if you wanted. So, in the case of maybe this stray UV point, I could right click, go to UVs, I could grab this. If I wanted, I could pull that in and put it into position. So you have the opportunity to go in and kind of play with these if you have to. Once again, I'll go back to object mode, and I'll save it.